My name, as it said there, is Christine Handley, and I work for a couple of organisations, but I'm representing the Biodiversity Research Group, which is a very long title, which we usually shorten to SYBRG. And I actually do quite a bit of work with Mel Jones, who I know who came to talk to you in January, and also with Ian Rotherham, who I'm the events organiser for all the big conferences that we do, and I'll go through some of that in a bit more detail as we go on. So that's just a little tiny bit about me. I've got lots more other hats that I wear. One of them is on the back there with a couple of things there. I'm also the chair of my local area's heritage group. So that's something that, again, we can talk about, maybe having a visit over to the Shirebrook area. But on with the title of Veterans, Ancients and Work Trees in an Industrial Treescape. And note I say treescape rather than woodland, because we now look at it as you can have woodlands and then trees outside a wood within a landscape, put them all together and you've got a treescape. So we now start thinking about it as a treescape. And when you think about woodlands today, you often think that they're no sort of nice areas to go for a walk, and you go and take your dog and just have a sort of a ramble through. But wind back 150 years, and a lot of the local woodlands were very, very different. They were actually working woodlands. They were the factory, the wood producing factories of their day. So you wouldn't have seen the sort of nice situation that you've got now. You'd actually see people making charcoal or bodging, making besom brushes with birch twigs, or harvesting poles. So that's just starting to get you thinking about what the landscape would have been like here 150 years ago. And these are just some of the woodland and forest products that, not necessarily 150 years ago, into medieval times, these are just some of the products that would have been harvested, and I'll come on to some of those a little bit later on. But you've got the direct ones from the trees, and you've got the distinction. Does everybody know the distinction between timber and wood? Timber is your big stuff that you might build your houses and things with, and wood is the smaller thing that you might build, say, your furniture with, or something like, or your carts or something like that with. I think Mel must have talked about rammel, and it is a local term that we still use for rubbish. It's your rammel, but it's the little bits of twigs and things that people would pick up. And then you've got leaf fodder and grazing and pannage with your where you put your pigs in for them to actually root around and get all the acorns. And then you've got your transformed product. I was talking earlier to can't remember your name, Ken about talking about white coal and charcoal and other transformed products. So from the wood, and you make them into all of these. And then you also, within woodlands, a lot of our local woodlands, because of the geology, have got mineral coal, ironstone, sandstone, and you've got little bits of quarries and diggings and delvings in the woodlands. And just sort of go through a few little bit start thinking about trees and what actually trees and how they grow, because that is important to some of the stuff that we come on to a little bit later. And they've got 4 life stages. This is a bit of a cheat because I've not been here long enough to see it from that to that. So it is actually all willow, and it's the new growth, mature, decaying, and then declining, and then decaying. But with the one on the right hand side, that's actually a phoenix, because with a lot of the trees, it looks as though they're dead, they've died down, but then they sprout back up again. They've got and willow is one that does that. And again, I'll come on to that a little bit later on. Worked trees, that's one of the phrases that you've probably heard of. And it's a tree which, this here, I don't know if can you see it, this tree here, it looks like lots of small trees in a clump. It's actually one base of one tree. So this is what we call an outgrown coppice. It's a worked tree. It's an oak that was chopped down, grown up, chopped down, grown up, chopped down, grown up for many generations. And we get a lot of work trees within our area, well, across the country, because, wood was the preeminent thing before plastics. It was a wood-based technology. And they've typically got a modified shape. I'll come on to that near the end of the talk and show you examples of all the different modified shapes. And because of that, it looks a lot younger than it actually is. Each of those stems may be 80, 100 years old, but the actual tree itself, the base of the tree, might be anything up to 500 years old. We don't know by just looking at it, that we can start to sort of do some estimates. And then another phrase that you'll hear are veteran trees. And veterans are usually trees that are sort of in the mature, almost declining stage of the life. So they've gone through several sort of cycles, maybe depending on the species, could be a couple of 100, 300 years old, could be about 100 years old. But typically the veterans have got the sort of the rot holes and pockets and burrs, and bits of branches have fallen off, and they look a bit tatty really, don't they? They don't look, they're sort of bits dropping off like I was going to say like me, and we'll pass over that one. But they are actually interesting because they tell you about the historical uses and the landscape, and some of them have got sort of cultural and they're trees that are there in the landscape that people have used as markers for, say, parish boundaries and that sort of thing, or on the boundaries of different farms. That they're actually there as something sort of fairly special. And then moving on from that, you've then got the classic ancient trees, which are very old and declining immensely, but some of them, such as the one here at the top, which is actually from Cork Abbey in South Derbyshire, and these are estimated to be between 800 and 1,000 years old. And there's a whole row of them along one edge of the parkland and also scattered around some of the other areas. It's an oak tree, so 800, 1,000 years old is about right for one just going into ancient. And I've just put here that there's three guiding principles, that they're interesting because of their age, they're in the ancient, the oldest stage of their life, and they're also relatively old to those of the same species. So different trees have different lifespans. If you had I'll give the example, say, of a birch, which is a shorter lived tree, if that got to 300 years, then that's a good age for a birch tree. An oak tree, that would just be coming into its mature stage. But 800 to 1,000 years old for an oak tree is a good one. And then at the bottom here is a rowan tree up in the Peak District, and this could be 600 years old, which is ancient for a rowan. You think of rowan, you've got them round the city, sort of some of the ornamental planting with the nice orange berries on that people get excited about with the wax wings in the middle of the city in the winter time. well, this is an ancient rowan tree in the uplands and Peak District. And looking at ancient trees, one of the things, well, I'll come on to this more at the end, but the Woodland Trust and the Ancient Tree Forum, a few years ago now, it's probably about 10, 15 years ago or so, they started, probably about 10 years ago, they started the Ancient Tree Hunt, where they actually got people, such as ourselves, such as volunteers, got people going out and recording their trees, which they thought were the most special trees within their local area. And they've catalogued all of those. And you can see these little symbols here, here, and here. There's a couple at Grenoside. And they're the records from this local area. If you go over to Derbyshire, it's covered all that side. And that's because they had the Derbyshire Wildlife Trust had a special project where they got all the volunteers together and went out and recorded all their trees. Here, it's just people such as ourselves that are going out thinking, oh yeah, that's a good tree, we'll put the records in. So we're about here, roughly. It's very, very thick arrow, but we're somewhere around here. And this is the sort of information. Now, this information, the form here, is on the Woodland Trust and the Ancient Tree Hunt website, and you can download it and fill it in. If you think you've got a wonderful tree in your local area and you want to do that, you can fill it in. It goes through, it gives this record, and they put it onto their national map, and then you're on the map with your special tree. That might be something that the group might want to think about. If you think, yeah, you know, we've got a couple of special trees, we can do this and upload the information there. And it's fascinating stuff, but I haven't got time to go in there. And as I then zoomed in, and you know, as sort of, I thought, oh, you know, somebody might have done that sometime in the past, but this is the area. It is an ancient woodland site. It's recorded on the Woodland Trust map as ancient woodland, but there aren't any trees there, tree records. And just a little bit about the sort of the background that I was looking into. And I don't want to go into all the management or anything, but the thing that, when I was looking at and putting this talk together, the thing that I thought, well, it's quite similar to an area, you know, my own local area, sort of round Handley and Woodhouse area, apart from we haven't got a hill fort. And now we look at it as a little oasis in a huge sort of urban, post-industrial, industrial area. It's a sort of the little oasis there. It's very sort of very heavily used with local people, and it's got lots of uses and lots of meanings for lots of different people. And it's had a multi-layered past. As you see, I've done a screen grab from one of your management plan, the archaeology map, and I can see, you know, with all the charcoal hearths, etc., and the pool portals here. And that starts to show, just on the sort of the one-dimensional map, all the different uses that we've had. And if you wind back a couple of 100 years into it was a rural. It was, you know, open fields. There was bits of woodland there. There were, you know, very, very different character. And I think this is from the end of the 18th century, looking from Attercliffe over up onto the hill there. And I found this in the Fueling the Revolution report. People will see that. And I put this in, and then I found this. I don't know if people have seen. Have you seen this?
I've seen that one.
It's this map, yeah. Some people will probably have seen it. It's from Well, it's this. I photographed the picture from out of the book of what's it called? 200 years of precious metal industry, and I thought it was good because this is a slight digression. I said, but Washford Bridge, the company, the Sheffield Smelting Company, well, it's now Solpro or something, it's still there. The owners of Wincobank Hall were the people who started the Sheffield Smelting Company.
Built this building.
And built this building, yeah. And the Rawson, you know all the connection there. So this is something I think that, they just did and had there, and just a minute, there's Wincobank Hall in the centre. So you're looking, so I think this way you're looking one way, and Wincobank Hall you're looking the other way. Yeah, he's looking at it that way. Yeah. And so, it shows you where the trees are. Now, I don't know how much artistic licence and how much actual trees, but it still shows you quite a different type of landscape. If you look over there now, you don't see anything like that.
Has got any history about all other trees? We were told when we were at school that nearly all trees on Wincobank Hill were cut down and used in mines. Is there any history about that?
I used to walk with an old man,
Yeah.
and he said what it was, and there was a guard who patrolled it.
That's right.
Is it every 25 years? It was cut down, but there was a guard.
Yeah.
Yes, one of the things, and I'll come on to it a little bit later on about the coppice and the coppice management system, and it is round about 20-25 years. Depends what you want with your product, but can I come on to that a little bit later, because a lot of the coppice, especially in the 19th and early 20th century, well, right up until 1960s, 1970s, not here, but they were still coppicing poles for pit props in the local area up the Fitzwilliam estate. They did that right up until the 1960s, 1970s. And this is the 1850s Ordnance Survey map, so we've jumped a little bit further on. But what I want you to think about here is you can see the field patterns, some of which will have come from when it was we had the enclosure awards. Some of the more sinewy ones would have been there earlier, as shown in that previous picture. But what you need to think here is that a lot of the trees, in fact most of the trees along here, were actual trees. It wasn't a pictorial representation of, oh, this is a bit of a woodland or anything. These were they recorded, they mapped the actual physical location of all the trees. So one of the nice exercises that you might want to do is, if you've got those boundaries, you know where the modern boundaries are any of those trees still there.
There's a lot missing.
Well, yeah, I should imagine there's an awful lot missing, but they may actually be a few of the trees there. It's remarkable actually how you find that, and how you find where you've got your little footpaths and things are actually echoes of some of these really old, really old boundaries. And if we just sort of go on to the next part of the talk, a little bit about wood-based technology. I think, as I've mentioned, before petrochemicals, and when you had the coal and that was manufactured into gas and the chemicals there, everything was based, or mostly everything was based around wood. So you got everything from wood. You could use wood in all sorts of different ways. And I've just listed a few of them there that You know, they were the industrial domestic village sort of use. You use them for medicine, you use them for transport, you use them, you know, for different food sources. And they were also markers in the landscape with your parish boundaries and your sort of meeting place trees. And I like this quote from Francis Evans, he was a professor at the University of Sheffield, a historian. An engineer of 1830 would have known the properties of as many as 130 different timbers. So he would use that as an engineer and look at, you know, what do we need for this, what do we need. They were very, very specific. This here is a swill basket, an oak swill basket that it's a recently made one, but it's on the pattern of how they would have made them 100, 200, whatever years ago. And they were used, they could be small ones or they could be really big, you know, huge ones. And they would be used for hauling, say, coal and charcoal and all the rest of it, as well as any sort of domestic. This here, it's not a very good photo, but it's actually a sled. And there's some little wheels here and the runners, and the pony would go in the shafts here. And it was used for hauling. These particular ones were used for hauling peat and for charcoal, and they were all wooden based. And we were sort of deliberating and said, well, they're actually quite stable, because we talked to some of the old guys who remember them being used, you know, when they were young. They're actually quite stable when you're going up and down steep hills, because you've got the runners and you've got the pony there. They're more stable than if you've got a cart. So that's a... Now I don't know whether you have any of, you know, but because I put that in because, well, you've got a big steep hill, haven't you? You could have had that of the haulage. I put this in to just to sort of reinforce the use that was made of wood. The income and the sort of the free bit of it might sound like two sides of a different sort of thing, but if you were a local person, you know, a peasant, commoner, then you didn't have much in the way of actual disposable income, so you had to harvest whatever was about, and you had certain rights as commoners to be able to go into the woodland, to go onto the common and take bits and pieces of wood. Again, I don't know whether Mel mentioned by hook or by crook. Did he mention that phrase at all? By hook or by crook means that if you could go along into the woodland or onto a sort of tree out of there, and you got your hook, and you could just go like that, probably a bit more force, but you could just go like that and pull the branch down, you could have that branch or tree, you know, and take it away with you. You couldn't actually get an axe and chop it down and take the tree away. There's lots of things in the court cases about people doing that and then getting found out. So that was in sort of your common area, not as in, but you know, in the sort of the common, the wider landscape. In the coppice woodlands or in the wooded areas, the local landowner, that very often was his, almost invariably his, sometimes very few occasions hers, but that was their wood, that they put the hedge round or put a bank round, and they had their industrial, in inverted commas, but their industrial type coppice system within that, protected from all the common people and the animals getting in unless you paid rent at certain times in certain parts of the coppice cycle to the landowner, and then he'd get an income from it. So for them, that was a huge, you know, it was a big source of income, and as well as being a source of actual wood products for them to use on their estate or to sell on to other people. And it came about because of this, it's very grand, sustainable resource management. But what it really means is that because we're a small island, we're quite well populated, especially some of the areas. If you just went and had a free-for-all, chopping bits of wood wherever, you'd run out of it unless you actually husbanded it, looked after it, managed it in a proper sort of fashion, which is where sort of some of the coppicing and other things come into, because that's what you would do. And also some of them, as I said, they were markers. They were, people liked the nice landscape. It's not a new thing that we like a nice landscape, although fashions change. But people valued their trees in the landscape. And these are just some of the trees and shrubs. I'll not go through that because I'll go on to this in a little bit later. What I will do on these next slides is just sort of skip through and just sort of say, because then when we're out, we'll have a walk round. We can discuss some of that there. But I just wanted to show you this one because of the different types of oak that you do get. These one here are the ones, they're actually from a place called Staverton down near Ipswich, and they're old pollard trees. There's hundreds and hundreds of them sort of just ranged about. Very, very strange. But these are the ones that you might think of as a classic old oak tree, big, fat, with bits of branches sticking out. This is also a really old oak tree. It's all sort of curly and twisted and everything because it's one of the upland version sort of sessile oaks. You get a lot of these, and you get some of these around this area, around our area here. I mean that was taken locally, and you get an awful lot of oak in this area because it was one of the preeminent favoured trees because it was so versatile. It was used for your charcoal charcoal. It was used for white coal. It was used in the tanning industry. The bark was peeled. It was used there. It was used in house building. You name it, it was used in the, for the all sorts of products. So you get oak because oak was favoured. Some of the other trees would have been cleared out of the wood to make room for more oak, and oak would have been planted as as acorns or favoured if it sprouted naturally. So that's something you need to think about when you're going into your wood. And ash, you're not going to the dieback and all that sort of thing, because I get on my soapbox with that. But ash wasn't so much favoured in your woodland. It was grown very much in hedgerows or around sort of farmyards or on the edges of woodland, not much in the centre of woodland. And it was grown very much, it was very well used. It was grown because it's a elastic shock absorber. So all the handles, but the vast majority of tool handles, the favoured wood is ash wood. And one of the big industries here was the edge tool industry. You had handles for all your tools. That was ash wood. So as well as it being quite common anyway, and it sprouts up very easily here, you will get a lot of ash coppice. As a tree, if it doesn't last that long, sort of 200, 300, 400 years maybe, but what it does, it grows to a certain size and then it splits. And then nowadays we'll just chop it all down and sweep it all away and that'll be it. So what they used to do, they used to coppice it and it would prolong its life. And elm we don't see much now because of the elm disease. But that, what up till then, that was again another really important tree for the local area. And this is a water pipe, an old water pipes. And there's some information I can't quite remember the quote, but in Barker's Pool, Barker's Pool was a reservoir, and all the water pipes from there were all made of elm, and they'd chamfer them down and then stick the next one in, and it was on and on it would go. And then birch, you'd think of birch as a scrubby sort of tree. You've got them all over, you're overrun by birch. You probably have work parties where you go and chop all the birch down and get rid of it and all the rest of it. But in our area, it was an important tree. Again, right up until 1960s, 1970s, it was still being used in some of the steel works with the twigs, the brash, in bundles to burn. It helped to burn off the crud and make the steel stronger. I think that's right. But it was used in huge quantities. So you get lots of old birch trees that are coppice birch, which now probably just look like lots of little birch trees. And hopefully we'll see some of those later on when we go and have a walk round. Now, I'll not go into these ones, but if we just have a look at these, and as we go and we see some of these, we can have a chat about them. Again, the alder and the rowan. And this, just to get you thinking, is these are all the factors that can influence how the tree grows and what you might see as your tree. So the shrub species, it's got a characteristic form. I mean, you get in your little tree identification books, you get these nice pretty pictures of little trees or that sort of thing. They're trees that are grown in the ideal situation. Most trees don't grow like that because they're not in the ideal situation. They've got the influences, and you'll see the influences with the climate and the pollution, especially where you are up on the top of the hill there. They have lots of pollution. The geology and the soils will affect them as well, so what they're actually growing in, and then what you've done to them. So what you might look at as a smallish tree, not very interesting, might actually be a really, really interesting tree. And in our area, because of all the pollution, because of the sort of soils that we're in, a lot of the smallish trees that you might think of, if you look in the books or whatever, think of, they're about 100 years old or so, they could be double that because of the poor conditions that they've been growing in and what's happened to them. So that's something else that you need to think about when you're looking at your trees. And then copy, we were talking about the coppice earlier, and I've shown you the birch coppice. This one is a sort of a new coppice that is on Warncliffe. They've recopied some of the trees there, and it was where they were cut on cycle, depending what the products were. There's two sort of sub-forms of coppice, if you like. When I was saying about the common land and then the actual woodland itself, in the woodland and in the industrial type system, you get all the coppice, the stems would all be the same age because they'd all be cut at the same time. So you'd have your nice sort of round stem, the footing, and then you'd grow them up, come along to 15, 20 years, depending what you were using them for. If you wanted thinner poles, you'd obviously cut them sooner. If you wanted, your pit props or something like that, you'd be talking about 20, 25 years as a coppice, what you call a coppice cycle. in the outside the wood, in the sort of the common pasture area, you might still have coppice if you didn't have grazing, but you might, or on the edges of fields or somewhere, but those coppice you might have more of a cut and come again. So you'd have people coming along and thinking, oh, I need 3 of those and 2 of you know, you can't go down to B&Q and go and say, oh, I'll have 3 of those and 2 of those and 4 of those. You'll walk along and think, oh yeah, that's about right, that's about the right diameter, and I'll have that one this year, we'll grow that one on for another 5, and etc, etc. So then you get a very uneven coppice stool with stems that are of different ages. So that's something else that you might want to look out for. And then when the coppice system finished, because in a lot of areas it finished in the sort of 19th century, you get what you call stored coppice. So what the foresters would do, the woodland owners would do, so right, we don't want sort of like all the stems like that, we just want a couple to grow on as big timber trees. And that's what you get there. And then the market changed, or the First World War came along, everything collapsed, everything changed, and nobody ever came back and actually harvested the trees. So you get something like this, which looks superficially like 2 trees growing close together. But when you actually go and look at them, it's all one tree, which was a no coppice stool. And then the other sort of most common form that you're likely to see are the pollards. Now, pollards usually, almost invariably, were cut above the browsing line of your animals, your grazing animals, when you've got an extensive grazing system. You know, so you just turn your cattle or your sheep, or in some cases your ponies and your deer out into the fields on the common, and you get, so you'd have pollards. We still do some pollarding, and this is again, it's willow pollarding down at Woodhouse Mill near where I live. Again with those, because it's the system that went into decline and finished a few 100 or more years ago. And so now you get these sort of very strange sort of tree. This is an oak tree in the Shirebrook Valley, and it's a lapsed pollard, so it's no longer used as a pollard, but you know, it's a very very strange looking tree.
You know that tree on the right hand side?
Mm-hmm.
What it's got?
Yeah.
You know, it's got like supports in. What's them? Are they supports that somebody's put in, or are they part of the tree?
They were part
You know
of,
that?
yeah.
No.
Yeah, they were the main trunk,
Yeah.
and it divided, and then we chopped off the branches that were coming up so that they flatten off, and then they make smaller branches from there. So it was part of the tree. And you get something called a stub pollard or a coppard, where you've got this between. It's not put off at ground level, it's not put off above the browse line, it's put off somewhere between. Now these might be for the industrial use, because they were in an area that was fenced off. But sometimes in our local area, because of somebody already mentioned about the mining industry, and the coal miners, when they were mining, very often they knelt to chop the coal. And in some, when the strikes and things like that were in the different areas, they were wanting some wood, they'd go in and they'd chop at knee height. So you get these funny little trees which are then sprouting up, and some of them are echoes from like the 1920s. In the 1930s, when they got that general strike and the big sort of pit strikes and things, and you find those in this local area. So I don't know again whether you've got any of those sorts of trees, but it might be something, you know, for you to look at. Might not be you know, it could be other people just going in and chopping them
What
off.
fascinates me is that if somebody starts taking pieces off tree, why didn't you take it all out?
Because if they took it all out, that would be it. You'd then have to wait for it to then grow back again. You know, you'd have to plant it, hope that it would grow, and then start the cycle over again. If you went through a lot of cycles, it would lose its vigour and it would die off. But if you got something that was there, that you knew was living, that you knew would be growing, and it actually stimulated the growth, and it made it, you know, quicker, easier for it to grow. You know, I think that's why they didn't grub it out. A lot of the woods, they did grub a lot of them out in the, again in the late 19th, early 20th century, when they were converting from this sort of coppice system into the forest system. And that's something we can talk about when, I think, you know, when we go out, we can have a look at some of that area then, because that, you know, you might find some of that there. I mean, they didn't just sort of chop it out, they used to dynamite them and haul everything out, and then the last sort of the last charcoal would be the dynamited roots and everything of the trees and all the stems, and that would be the, you know, the last the last charcoal. And then they'd come along and they, you know, the landowner foresters would come along and plant a new crop, often mixed conifers with a few broadleaves, you know, interspersed, because the theory was that, you know, we needed more conifers than we did broadleaves because of the petrochemical industry, but we digress into somewhere else then. This is something you may not find, you may do. A shredded tree is something where all the sort of the lateral branches, you chop them off, and then they'd sprout lots of tiny growth, adventitious shoots, and you get trees with a high stem, and then they've got all sort of big knobbles on, and then all lots of little shoots coming out of there. And they will be harvested each year for animal fodder. Oh. And this still happens in some of the Scandinavian countries. That they still do things like that. You know, it might happen naturally, but it might actually, you know, you might find some of that in your old hedgerow trees. And then if we can't forget the open grown or the standard trees. And this again is the classic layered hedgerow, which is very often now it's outgrown. I mean, I don't know whether you have any hedges in your area that you know, might, or you want to plant a new hedge and then you get somebody to come along and do the hedge laying. But was a laid hedge, so you did lean it down and then it's sort of grown back up again. So you find a lot of those sorts of things, and sometimes you find them in modern woodland, or in what we're woodland now, because the woodland's taken over from old field systems, and you know, you've got your hedges in the middle of the woodland. Sometimes you can actually stand there and you can see the lines going down. Again, I don't know if you've got any of those sort of, you've got things. That's often the case. It is all a bit of a jumble, and you've got to sort of start to tease it apart. And one way that you can do that, and on the leaflets on the back, there's the shadows leaflet and there's industrial treescapes leaflet. And if you look on our website, we have got a survey pack that you can download and then copy survey forms to record your work trees. And this is the sort of information that we ask people to record. It's more detailed than the Ancient Tree Forum because it's for a different thing, but if you start to do that, you get your eye and then you find, and then you can start to actually piece together. And that's just a diagram of which bit that you measure. It's quite tricky when you know, the standard is diameter at breast height. But as I say, if I'm only 5 foot, what's it, and somebody's 6 foot, what's it, then which bit do we measure? You know, are we up here or are we down there? So it's usually 1.2 to 1.5 metres above the ground level. And just sort of finish with, to get people again to sort of thinking about, you know, you may record some of your ancient woodland, you know, the indicators, your plants, your flowering plants. And you get, no, this is just a very, very small selection, but they can also actually indicate where your past industry was. So with some of them, the dog's mercury and the wood anemones, in some areas around Derbyshire, it's they've been associated with iron bloomeries, you know, small bloomery areas, because of the way the soil was disturbed and the charring with the geology. It favours those plants, and bluebell is a classic. That, you know, we've got one of the biggest concentrations of bluebells because we've got one of the biggest concentrations of industrial woodland, and bluebells are quite invasive actually, and they can come in when all the turf has been stripped of all the other nice flowering plants. And what they used to do when they did the charcoal was actually strip the turf off to cover the charcoal stack. So in that's why you don't get many woodland indicator in your ancient woodland in this local area, because most of it was dug up and used to put on your charcoal or taken. Or I was talking to Ian Rotherham about doing this talk today, and he was saying in the 19th century that they used to have, you know, the cage birds, the skylarks and stuff. They used to cut little squares of turf and put it in the cages for the birds to sit on. And there was big harvesting, and you know, in London, like on Hampstead Heath and all this sort of thing, there was big areas where they used to harvest all of that. Well, if you do that over several years, etc., you know, there's no flowers there left. You know, so you come along in 50, 60, 70 years' time, look in a woodland and think, oh, there aren't any flowers here. Oh, it can't be very interesting. Well, actually, it's probably because it's been so heavily worked and it's been used and all the rest of it. That's why you haven't got them, not because they weren't there in the first place. You know, so that's something else. When you read some of the books about the general sort of ancient woodlands and indicate and look at this and you should find this and that and all this and all the rest of it. Well, if it's in an ideal situation, you probably will. If we're in this sort of area, not this particular area, but you know, in the sort of Sheffield and wider district, it's very unlikely that you will, other than in little tiny slivers round the edge or you know, along river banks or something like that, where people haven't actually used all the area as much as they possibly can. So, when we go for a walk, it's not just a pretty walk. It will be a pretty walk, it'll be great, fantastic. But it's actually stepping back into the past. You know, if you can start to look, it's actually stepping back into the past and, you know, getting in touch with the sort of the history of the area in a bit of a, you know, different way than maybe just looking at the sort of built structures, things like that. So I just want to do a few acknowledgements. I have to do the acknowledgements because a lot of what I'm telling you tonight, I've really only scratched the surface of an awful lot of work that an awful lot of people have been doing for the last 20, 30 years. You know, I could sort of stand here and talk all day, which is very, very boring, and you wouldn't want me to do that, to go through some of the other things here. As I say, I was talking to Ian, and he said, if they want me to come and do a talk, just let me know, because he won't. I said, yeah, I can tell them about this and tell them about the other. So there's Ian, you've met Mel and Ian, and there's Paul, who's Ian's colleague there. And also an awful lot of volunteers have also helped over the years. When we did our Woodland Heritage Champions project, which was across England, we went into different groups and helped them to interpret and understand their own local woodland. We learnt a lot about that. We produced a big pack which has gone on and on and on. And then more recently the volunteers with the treescapes. Because it's the sort of thing where you go into a new wood, you always start to learn something, you always look at something, or people ask you a question and you follow things through. And then there's Ted Green and the Ancient Tree Forum, the chap measuring the tree on the Cork Abbey photos, Ted. And he's the conservation consultant forester for Windsor Great Park now in his current form. But he and his colleagues, Jill and Keith and a lot of others, formed the Ancient Tree Forum about 20 so years ago. And it was after one of Ian's first woodland conferences in Sheffield, when we all wandered round Ecclesall Woods, and the inspiration for that came from, so when you're looking at the Woodland Trust and the Ancient Tree Hunt maps and everything, it was the Ancient Tree Forum, and it actually started in Sheffield at some of our things there, and we've gone on and on and on and on and on. But I'm not going to go on and on and on any longer.
Before you finish, could you just read out the website address, because I can't see it in the blue.
So it's www.ukeconet.org.
Thank you.